Greetings all, this is Dickie Adams with Pocketnow.com, and today we're taking a last final look at the Galaxy Tab 10.1 in comparison with some other tablets we have on hand and with some of the others that we've used. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So here we're looking at the Galaxy Tab 10.1 from Verizon versus the HP Touchpad. And it's a little hard to tell from the screen here, but the HP Touchpad is they're both on full brightness. The HP Touchpad has a noticeably kind of yellow tint to it over here, and this is more of a blue-white. Neither one of them are probably very color corrected, but that doesn't really matter. So I've got the default web browsers brought up on both of these, and so we're just going to kind of launch the web browser for the Pocketnow site together. You can see them loading here. Both connected to Wi-Fi. And both still loading the site, specifically the ads. The text is certainly more readable on the Galaxy Tab, even though it's smaller. It looks a little blurry here on the HP model, and this is already finished loading the page. We're still waiting for the HP Touchpad to finish loading, and I realize that this is kind of an outdated model technically, since HP's decided that it's not going to make this device anymore, but you can kind of see the difference in the web browser, and it's still not finished loading up the page. Scrolling through, you can see this is a little chunky. Scrolling through here, it's a lot more fluid. Let's go ahead and open up a article on both of these. If we look here, no content here on the HP Touchpad that we can select. It's completely missing, whereas on the Galaxy Tab we actually can launch the video in the review. Size-wise, as you can see here, the Galaxy Tab is a little bit longer, but noticeably thinner and a whole lot lighter than the HP Touchpad is. This really feels like a slab of plastic, and it's very heavy. This is lightweight, feels very nice in the hands, easy to use. So unsurprising that in this case the Galaxy Tab 10.1 would win out over the HP Touchpad, even at the $99 that the HP Touchpad is. So here we're looking at the Galaxy Tab 10.1 and the original iPad. And we both got them at Google here with the default browser, Safari, and the default internal browser on the Tab. And let's just go ahead and launch this. What I found the difference between these two particular devices, and obviously this one's not going to load any flash here, and we even got an advertisement on this particular showing. The page is still loading in the background, thankfully. But the Tab is definitely lighter and thinner, a little bit longer, as you can see here, a little bit narrow as far as the video screen is concerned. Quality of the pixels, as far as like being able to read here, I actually can see the Galaxy Tab screen a little bit better than the iPad one, and I'm at a little bit of an angle here. Screen brightness, it feels like they're just about the same screen brightness wise between the two of them on these devices. Now, that said, it still feels like in the realms of the apps and how the Android system works in comparison with the iPad and the iOS ecosystem that's in the background there. Really, I still feel like the Android tablet system is a lot like the iPad 1 when it first came out, meaning that a lot of the apps that are out there just aren't really ready for prime time, or aren't quite, don't look as good as they really could. Just like when the iPad 1 first came out, there were a whole lot of tablet applications available. There were a lot of iPhone apps that you could use the screen doubling with, and that just didn't look as good as everything else. Now, that said, moving on to the iPad 2, let's go ahead and bring that up here. The iPad 2 is a little bit thinner not very much, just a hair here. And as far as everything else goes, size-wise, it's just a smidge shorter, has a little wider screen format than the Galaxy Tab. As far as speed goes, I found that they're pretty negligible. Now, you can't really compare Android processing power and RAM and all of that and what the actual specs are, the specs on the iPad. It's not a fair game in playing numbers with these sort of devices. Unless you're playing Android to Android or iPad to iPad, it just doesn't make any sense other than looking at what the device can do. And what I found is that on the iPad, and I'm not an Apple fanboy by any means, if you pointed the camera up, we'd see a lot more PCs in this room than you would Apple products. But the iOS system just works right now, and Apple's done a really good job of controlling the hardware and the software combined to make a really solid ecosystem and provide a lot of tools to developers to produce some really neat apps, and have courted those developers to do those apps in a really nice fashion. There's a lot more music creation apps on the iPad. There's even apps that allow you to connect multiple iPads together to do music creation. Whereas Android's just getting started with that. If you look at the music type of applications that are on there, there's not an IMS 20 app on there now. There's not an app like GarageBand on there yet. There are some tuner apps and there's some funky little synths, but they're not nearly as good as what this now has. And again, back in the day when the iPad first came out, there weren't a whole lot of music apps for this either. So my anticipation is that unless Apple really steps up their game with iOS 5 and moving ahead, that the Android tablets are really going to start coming into their own and start picking up some of those, high-end apps that people expect and have been using here. Now, in comparison, as far as usability between these two apps, as far as simplicity, Android is still more of a tinkerer's type system, in my opinion, and I like to tinker. Whereas iOS I can hand to my 2.5-year-old, and she'll be able to navigate it through it very quickly and very easily without fiddling around with a whole lot of stuff. Get herself into Netflix or launch other applications, and she understands this single button interface to get back and forth. Whereas this multi-button interface, while she would obviously learn it and pick it up pretty easily as a child, it's not quite the same to her. She doesn't care where the content comes from, though. If I'm playing Netflix on this or Netflix on that, obviously it doesn't matter. And I've found that even watching Netflix on this Galaxy Tab versus the iPad 2 doesn't really make that much of a difference to myself either. Now, my iPad 2 does not have a data plan with it. So I found that the Galaxy Tab's data plan has been outstanding to have available to myself when I'm out on the road. I don't have to do a whole lot of tethering, and really it makes me think that the next time I upgrade, if I choose to do an iPad again, I'm really going to think heavily about doing a data package, because I tell you what, that 4G speeds on this tablet have been very nice. In all, I found really Android isn't necessarily a loser in this case. It just, as I said before, feels like it's the first gen product. It's just getting started. Compared to items like the Nook Color, which I've had, it's outstanding. Compared to the Galaxy Tab 7, the Galaxy Tab, the original, it's outstanding. In comparison to the Asus or the Motorola Zoom or really any product out there, other than setting aside the iPad, iOS, and leaving it aside, comparing this device to any other tablet that's on the market really blows away just about everything that's out there. And it's really a fantastic device for the price. As soon as you bring back the environment and the ecosystem of iOS with the iPad 2, then this doesn't look quite as strong. This you still have to use iTunes with, which I really dislike. I don't have to use iTunes. I can use whatever syncing app I choose. I've got Google Music on here. I've got a lot more services. The Google apps look better on this than they do on the iPad. And frankly, in another 2 years, we may find that these are actually the better devices on the whole, and Apple gets stuck where it is. As far as interface goes between the Galaxy Tab and the iPad or the HP Touchpad, really I do prefer Android's ability to lay out the icons as I see fit. I realize you can do that by jailbreaking the iPad. I jailbreak the iPad for other reasons, not for moving the icons around. I also like the ability to add widgets to the home screen, although that's not really that important when it comes down to it when you're trying to work in a tablet environment. My workflow has been created around this particular device. I use LogMeIn a lot. I use the Docs to Go. I use the Kindle reader with this particular device, and I've worked around it enough now that I know how to make things work correctly on this. I found that when I first got started with the Galaxy Tab, it took a little bit of time to adjust my workflow, but it did adapt very quickly. Although, again, the apps that were written for Android, for example, the Office apps, were a little sluggish on the Galaxy Tab versus on the iPad. And it comes right down to the developers and how they're developing, not necessarily the hardware or anything particularly wrong with this particular device or anything about it. Battery life between the two, compared to the HP Touchpad or the Nook, the Galaxy Tab does a fantastic job. It does an outstanding amount of time on battery life and can go for hours and hours and hours as far as constant use. If you leave it turned off, it goes into standby mode, and you have any sort of notifications that are popping up, it chews that battery life very, very quickly. Whereas with the iPad, the battery life just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes when you're using it, and then if you turn it off, it goes and goes and goes and goes some more. Much longer than if the Galaxy Tab. And in fact, if I turn them both off with the same, and both at 100%, the Galaxy Tab would run out of power faster than the iPad 2 was. And that's probably due to the way that Apple's dealing with the apps. And again, that's just a strict comparison of how the perception of the products are, not necessarily that the Galaxy Tab is a bad device. Should you buy the Galaxy Tab? That depends on what you're really wanting to accomplish. If you're already an Android user and you're comfortable with Android and you don't mind tinkering and your anticipation is that the product is going to get better, and it will, then you could go with an Android device. You'll love it. It'll do everything you want it to do. If you've already started out on an iPad and you've got a lot of apps in that ecosystem, and there are, especially if you're involved with music, like I like to do, you're going to want to stick with the iPad 2 for now. Don't give up on this quite yet until this gets a little bit better down the track. That wraps up our video series on the Galaxy Tab 10.1 with LTE from Samsung for Verizon. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. We'll try to answer them in an orderly fashion. And we'd like to hear your feedback on the video series as far as the tablets go, to see if we would like to see more of this sort of tablet coverage in the future. Thanks for watching.